Well, Pastor Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. I'm so excited to connect with you. I know you are a dear friend of the Truth Networks, and we are so excited to hear from you today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, man, I'm pumped to be here, pumped to have the conversation.
Awesome. I've heard a lot of really good from you. I'm excited to hear from you myself, as you are someone who is right up our alley in the ministry. And so here from, man, I would love to give you a space to really share your story with our guests. We've kind of brought people on to share how God has used anything and everything in their lives to really shape the person they've become. And so whatever you feel comfortable sharing, would love for you to lay that out here about your own life, your mission, Mercy Hill Church, all the good
Yeah,
stuff in that. And so the floor is yours. What has God done in your life up to this point?
great, man. Well, we can get into anything, man, that you think will be beneficial, but just a quick kind of overview. Yeah, I got saved when I was a kid. Maybe the first time the Spirit ever really knocked on my heart. For whatever reason, I just kind of came running. I got saved in a Winn-Dixie parking lot in the front seat of my dad's truck after a church league softball game. So I always tell
Come
people
on.
you can't get any more Southern Baptist than that. Okay, those are my credentials. But
Uh,
no, in all seriousness, man, I've always found that the church is my home. I love it. I've always loved it. I love being there, even when I was a kid. Was raised in a small but strong church, that was kind of normative for that day, 150 people in a what then was kind of a rural area. Now it's a massive blowing going suburb of Jacksonville, Florida. But yeah, man, just kind of learned to walk with Jesus at an early age in that church. Learned the Bible, vacation Bible school, and mission trips and the whole thing. And certainly, I would say that my path was maybe the danger in my path was probably leaning more toward the older brother than the younger brother. Not to say there wasn't sin or rebellion, but generally, I think that my probably biggest trap was being, way into the church and looking
sure.
down on others and
Yep.
that kind of idea. Um, and so, anyway, went through high school, was very involved in FCA, things like that, very involved in our student ministry. I say student ministry, our youth group, back in the day.
Yep.
And,
Yeah.
uh, had a chance to go play ball in college, which was really fun. I was an athlete my whole life, played all the sports. Obviously, I know you were a great baseball player. I didn't play at your level, Division I level, okay, but I
I
did play.
wasn't as good as I think I was. I'll tell you that much.
I did. I got it. Well, that's tough, man. There ain't nothing harder than hitting a baseball. There's nothing harder than hitting a baseball. But anyway, had a chance to go. Ended up, there are some turns in this, but ended up at North Greenville College in the dark corner of South Carolina, they call it, the mountains right there, and had an incredible experience at the little small Division II school. Met my wife there. Had met some lifelong friends there. Actually, had some buddies that moved up with me to play ball from Florida, so we kind of all stayed connected.
Yeah, let's go.
Married girls from all that same area, and then we felt the call. I had an old school call at 16 years old on a mission trip where I felt like God was calling me to the ministry. I didn't know exactly what that meant. I led worship for a long time until I got to college and realized what an actual worship leader sounds like, and realized that I was maybe not going to be not talented enough for that. But had a chance to start preaching at a young age. One of the good things about coming from what was then sort of a bit of a rural background with a small church is, man, they believe in the Holy Spirit call in your life to, the surrender to the call to preach. And so I was preaching at a young age. Probably not well, not probably not well, not well. But man, we went to seminary at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary and fell backwards into the greatest leadership growth environment of my life. It was no fault of my own. It was not because I was more talented or anything. Man, it was God's timing, right time, right place, and I was hungry. And I landed at a church called the Summit Church in Raleigh, Durham, which I know Pastor JD has come and done chapels at Liberty and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
He's now been a president of Southern Baptist Convention, and he's got a huge platform and great church. Could not be more thankful for my time there. Was shaped in ministry for 5 years. JD is not the type of leader that says, "Hey, come read a book and let's drink coffee." I've never done that ever with him one time. His style of leadership, as mine is, man, I'm running and I'm on a mission. And if you want to keep up, I'll teach you everything I know. I'll open the playbook for you wide open, and I'll give you every opportunity to lead. But you got to be able to keep up. And so that's kind of the way that we are at Mercy Hill. Also, not for everybody. We're fast, but man, for guys that are bent that way, it's very much we're going to throw you in the deep end, and that's how we do it. So was ultimately just so blessed to be there for 5 years, and they came to me early on in my time at the summit and said, "Man, would you consider planting a church?" They had this massive vision of planting all these churches, but had not done it really yet. And it was funny. They didn't know I had a background with a church plant that didn't really go that well. And for me, I was young, and I was a student minister at a church plant that kind of had a fracture, and it hurt. And they didn't realize this. This is so immature, Ryan. I'll tell you. But like when they asked me, would you ever want to plant a church? My first thought was, hey, bro, I came to seminary to go be the pastor of a real church. Okay. And that is just so immature. But you can see in 5 years how I went from that immature mindset to I'm going to leverage every relationship that I have in this life. And I'm going to move from a church that I love, and we're going to give it one shot, everything I got, to plant a new church. And that's what we did. We planted a church in 2012, about an hour and a half down the road. We took 30 adults, young adults, all in their 20s. Mostly, 10 of them were college students. I was 28 years old. I had 2 young kids. We were probably the most advanced in terms of just life stage. Me and my wife both have been working full time, and man, we moved to Greensboro, North Carolina, to plant this church. And by God's grace, it's just gone really well. We've been here for over 12 years, and we can get into any of that stuff you want to. But our church really grew fast, and it's had a big impact. Our biggest impact is church planting and missions. I'm actually wearing a shirt from one of our church plants in Halifax, Nova Scotia. We commissioned a new church plant yesterday, all from within the house. So, those are some of our big things. My family, man, we have 4 kids, and they're doing great. They're blowing and going in the ministry as well in terms of just loving life at the stage they're in with our student ministry and that kind of thing. We do have a daughter that our 4th child is a daughter that came to us through adoption. She's at Mercy Hill, we call them our special kind of chosen kids. So she was chosen to be at Mercy Hill and in our family. She has Down syndrome. She has pretty significant challenges. So that's a dynamic with our family, but God has been super gracious. We say, hey, there's times, in our family, we walk with a limp. I mean, we do. We've got to be slower about things, and we have to plan in ways that other families don't have to, but at the same time, there's no greater joy. And there's no love without sacrifice. That's kind of what Elizabeth Elliot said. And so, the chosen thing is a big deal. I actually have a book coming out in January of 26 on sort of the chosen journey for Mercy Hill and for our family, and so we're excited about that. So, man, that's kind of us in a nutshell. Almost been married for almost 20 years, so that's us, man.
Man, I have so many questions for you after all that, but I know you did mention kind of the prodigal son story where you felt like you were more of the older brother. And I'll tell you what, Pastor, my story is more so a mixture of both, where I kind of grew up, in the church and knew the right from wrong. I got to this place where I thought as long as I read the Bible and have all this stuff memorized, like I'm good. I'm not going to fall in temptation. I'm not going to have any problems. And I get to college, and I quickly learned that, there's a lot more to being born again than just head knowledge up here. And so I kind of had this both and perspective of, yes, I was the prideful, full of it Pharisee, but then also the prodigal son of I just ran as far as I could. And I'm curious for your perspective, because I think there's a lot of stories on different people have different testimonies in this area. I feel like a lot of people can relate to either one or the other. A lot of times you don't really see both. And I'm curious in your own life, how have you seen God use this perspective and this story to really shape who you are today? Because I know God can really bring both people into a position of surrender and ministry and using him for the kingdom, but I know there are some struggles that also come with that too. So what would you say, how has God shaped that area of your life and who you become?
Well, I think when we mention older brother, I don't want it to sound like, man, that there was no rebellion and walking away in sin in my life, because that's not true.
Yep.
But and there are some specific things, as you walk through high school and early college that you struggle with, and I mean, you could probably characterize some of those as more younger brother-ish, but generally speaking, I really believe this. I got saved at 6 years old. People ask me, man, do I ever question my baptism or anything because I was so young? And the answer is just no. I don't know why. But I've never felt, one of the ways I tell people is like, I have never felt like I was alone ever. I really believe the Spirit has been with me, and I've been regenerate for that long. And with that, there's so much good. You maybe end up not doing drugs in a biker game in Las Vegas.
Sure. Yep.
That's good. But at the same time, you can become very prideful about the things that you haven't done,
Yeah.
or the path that you're on. Become prideful about the amount of scripture that you feel like and just and that's just a constant kind of battle to say, well, I'm living a life that is worthy, almost like you don't need the gospel, and those things are they're just as dangerous, and so I really praise God for getting around the Summit Church in, let me think, married in '05, graduated in '06. We got married in college, so that was kind of a funny, a lot of people wait, but that was a unique season. But so 2007, 8, 9, I was in seminary. That's when I got around the Summit Church, and I got around what now is a buzzword, but I think sometimes people lose the definition. I got around the first time I'd ever been around gospel-centered preaching. And that, it was Pastor JD, influenced heavily by Keller and a lot of that movement that came into the Baptist world during that time. And it was almost like I felt like I was getting saved every single week. I couldn't understand it. It was like, it was a personal revival. Absolutely. I would come home from church at the Summit Church and talk to my wife and just say, I've never been around preaching like this. I don't really know what's happening. And all that was happening really was, and JD's a fantastic preacher, but all he was really doing was showing how the gospel motivates sanctification rather than fear, or rather than just like a do good pride, pull yourself up by your bootstraps attitude, and feeling, hearing gospel driven growth in the believer's life was a personal revival for me, and I think it really is maybe what helped me shake some of that older brother out.
That's so good. I mean, I could relate to that completely. I think you hit the nail on the head. That's kind of what drives you to then see a life of change, not of your own power, but of the Spirit's. Pastor, you mentioned you have a daughter with Down syndrome. It's funny. My mom's sister, so my aunt, has Down syndrome. She is
Yeah.
43 now, and I'll tell you what, man. She's the most joyous person I've ever met. Just completely changes my life every time I see her. And I'm curious. I ask this question to all of our guests: how has God pruned your heart? But
Yeah.
for this idea specifically, I know this can be a tough season. I've heard stories over and over again from my grandparents
Yeah.
of how difficult it can be. What do you think God has done in the biggest way to prune your heart through this scenario in your life? How has this taught you more of His character and more of your
Yeah.
need for Him?
Yeah. Well, man, there's nothing like a special needs child to really make you depend on God as a rock in your life. I mean, Down syndrome is very much a spectrum, and our precious baby girl is very much on the lower end of functionality when it comes to Downs. So she's 8 years old. She doesn't talk. She's nonverbal. Maybe that may be her reality forever. She's in a diaper. She's, I mean, it's there could be other things going on. A lot of times, autism is associated with Downs. A lot of, she's adopted, so it's like, man, we don't. There was really no prenatal care, and we don't know
Yeah.
what happened. I mean, so I think number one, there's a lot of health challenges, a lot of fears that come with raising a child like this. I mean, Faith Ann is 8 years old and weighs about 34 pounds. So that gives you a little bit of a, most people, my other kids were bigger than that when they were 2.
Sure.
And so there's just a lot, but I've seen God be a rock when we didn't have anywhere else to turn. God healed her heart. A lot of kids with Downs end up having heart surgery, and we thought we were going down that path, and our church prayed, and we saw literally a miracle that God healed her heart. So I've seen Him as a healer. And I also think that probably the biggest pruning is, I'll give you an anecdote here. So there's a movie called Peanut Butter Falcon, and it's about some characters, and one of the guys has Down syndrome, and he's very funny, and he's very caring, and people don't realize a lot of times those people that have Downs that are that way are very high functioning, And people have asked me, like, have you ever seen that movie? And I'm like, no, because I already deal with pain maybe of what are probably going to be unrealized expectations. And just having to rely on the Lord to say, man, all of this is in your hands. Wherever she's able to get in life, it's all in your hands. It's all for your glory. And I can't idolize what I want our future to look like with Faith Hand. Instead, we're gonna have to like settle in to whatever God has for her. And man, she's had a huge impact on our church, massive. Our entire chosen ministry. We set a goal in 2020 to have 200 adoptive and foster families by 2025, and we're going to hit that goal. We're almost there. And, a lot of that's a direct result of Faith Ann's life. And so, she's having a huge impact. She's living her life. God's getting glory from it. And we're going to need to be very content. Now, that doesn't mean we don't push her and have big expectations, but we're going to need to be content with what God has for her and in his plans,
Sure. Yeah. I talk to my grandfather all the time, and he never shies away from telling the truth of, the day that my aunt was born. I mean, they call it the darkest day in their life. And it's just like, man, everything is just clouded. For the rest of our lives, we're going to be miserable. But you talk 40, 45 years later, it's like, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to us, not only in their marriage. My grandmother passed this summer, but when she was alive, their marriage, their own relationship with Jesus, serving. I mean, they turned into two of the most selfless people I've ever met. I think it is a testament. I'm sure you can testify to it too.
Well, and I bet your mom is a very deep human being because of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And it changes everything, man. It changes everything. So it is cool to see, especially hearing from you. It's like, man, God is using a lot of different stories and a lot of different ways to shape who we become. Pastor Andrew, we have a lot of young adult listeners, especially on the topic of leadership and church ministry. People my age, we have this desire to kind of go into ministry and lead and steward a big platform. But in this current season of life, you and I both know that we not only do we not have that, but it is funny, we kind of expect things to happen quickly. We want to jump into a senior pastor role. We want to jump into a business CEO. But a lot of times God's doing something in the midst of our pruning years that we don't really agree with necessarily or understand. Speak for a second here, Pastor, the importance of just being faithful where you are, no matter how big a church may be or no matter how important your role may seem.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I was no different, man. I was no different. God shielded me at 24, 25 years old from different opportunities that I would have jumped on. When I was 25 years old, if anyone, unhealthy, wouldn't have mattered. If they would have given me a shot to be a lead pastor, I would have jumped on it because I wanted it that bad. And the Lord shielded me from that in some ways because I wouldn't have been ready for that. I would not have been ready to steward that. I could give you 2 or 3 examples of things that I would not have been ready to handle. That said, you're talking to a guy that planted a church at 28 years old. So I'm not saying, I'm not one of these guys that's like, well, you're in your 20s, so you don't have any leadership value or whatever. I'm like, dude, let's get on with it. So there's this tension of, man, I'm believing that God is pruning, shielding, giving me wilderness experience in order to get strong. And at the same time, man, I don't think it needs to be a prolonged adolescence type of thing. Like, we need to get after it. You guys are the next generation. Man, guys planting their church in there. I can name 5 or 6 guys that have had incredible ministries that all planted around that age. 28 years old seems like a little bit of a magic number. And so, with that said, I would say in terms of being faithful where you are, that's a great way to say it. The other thing I would say is just, well, I would, borrow maybe a term from Steve Martin, the comedian, become so good they can't ignore you. That's really, I think, what needs to happen as guys are coming up. We can do more, we always overestimate what we can do in 3 years. We underestimate what we can do in 10, 15, 20, 30. And that is just a reality. Like, a lot of young guys, they feel like, man, I can jump into this and I can have this huge thing, but they don't realize that it takes 10, 12, 15 years to become an overnight success. And that's what's ironic is like, oh, this guy just came out of nowhere. It's like, no, he's been doing what he's been doing since he was 25 and he just turned 40 and now he's on the conference platform or whatever. And he's been posting, he's been blogging, he's been podcasting, he's just been hammering it week in, week out for 15 years, and now all of a sudden he's an overnight success. So I'm very much into the phrase brick by brick. Man, what are the things that we need to do today and this week and this month, to become a little better, a little sharper, a little healthier. I've got a lot of philosophies around life and how flywheels work and how we try to build momentum with the different categories of our life. And, I just think for younger people, they need to hear that there's no shortcuts. You jump, there's no shortcuts to get, to that, you just got to go through it. You got to build it brick by brick, and God does that in your life. And I think in the economy of His kingdom, I think generally that's how we end up generally in a sense where you don't end up with someone whose platform outkicks their character's coverage. There's something about the week in, week out building of it in community. Now, do we see, man, are there David Platts of the world that at 27 years old are the greatest expositor and they're at all the stuff? And
Yep.
yeah, and that's, and man, praise God for that. That's fine. That's great. I mean, that brother for obviously has been used incredibly, but there are other examples of that guy that gets rushed a little bit that way, and then their character just can't sustain it. I mean, and so I would just say build brick by brick. And I also think, man, the platform thing when you mentioned that, that's a dangerous trap. It's like I would encourage the listeners to have a view of their success in life as being all that God has for them to be, and not trying to be more. Certainly not trying to be less. So I mean, I know I want to run with. I want guys that are hungry. They want to make their biggest impact. Man, they don't want to be the same next year as they are this year. They want to grow in every area of their life. They want to grow in leadership. They want to have more money. They want to have more kids. They want to have more responsibilities. They want to be stronger physically. I mean, that's who I want to run with. But I don't think that we need to set up this kind of idealized, well, what does that translate in terms of Instagram followers, or what does that translate into in terms of a size of church or whatever. It's more like, man, the process is going to be something I fall in love with, and we're going to pray that God will let me be the biggest impact that I can, and be okay with that, and that's and whatever that is, it is.
Yeah, that's good. The process. I think the challenge for a lot of us, speaking for myself and my peers, is we kind of tend to look at the people who do have those platforms, and then we start to compare their gifts to our own. And so it's like, well, they have the 5 million followers, and like I've heard them speak, and I'm pretty similar, and so I should have that. I should have the same level of influence. And I think you're right. I think sometimes, everything that God does promote, everything that you get promoted may not be God, and every closed door may not be the devil. Like, I think it always kind of depends. And so every season may be different, especially for young guys.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that I mean, I'll just say for myself, I think that I overestimate my gifts, and I underestimate the amount of work it's going to take to get there, So dude, I'm a numbers guy. I love growth. My big thing, our Breaking Barriers, we have a podcast called Breaking Barriers, just went over 20,000 listens. Like, I don't have any problem saying the number one thing we need to do to plant more churches is for churches to grow numerically. So I'm like the most, I'm almost rub people the wrong way when it comes to like growth and stuff, because I have no problem with any of that. That said, like if a guy has something in his mind of like, man, I need a church of 1,000 or 2,000 or whatever, part of me don't even have a problem with that. But part of me is like, dude, if you haven't done that, you have no idea what that takes. No clue. And guys can't know. They don't realize how many scars come with that. Our church, we planted our church in 2012, and it broke 1,000 on our second birthday. And, I was talking at one time, a guy named Vance Pittman from the North American Mission Board, he was talking to me, and somebody said that about our church, and he looked at me dead in the eyes, and he said, hey, man, there are very few people that know how hard that is. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. there are very few. It just doesn't happen very much. And so my point is, I think that guys don't know what they don't know. And so, like you're saying, it's easy to overestimate our own giftings and underestimate the amount of work and scars that another guy might have because he's trying to carry what God has given him to steward.
That's good, Pastor. I want to get back to that leadership idea, because I know, and I'm sure you've seen this, there's kind of an aspect of leadership that culture has kind of pushed into the church. There's this emphasis on power and authority, and domineering dominance, kind of like you set the stage here. But it seems like Christ presents a different type of leadership in the scripture. How have you seen culture kind of influence the church in this area? And then what should a Christian leader truly look like?
Well, I think it goes both ways. I think that if you want to find a Christ-like follower that's a great leader, I think you can read Jim Collins and get a level 5 leader all day long. And somewhere he got a lot of these ideas. It's kind of the Chick-fil-A idea. It's like, man, why is Chick-fil-A who they are? Well, maybe it's because they have taken more principles from Scripture rather than the culture. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it influences the other way as well when you kind of have this this domineering kind of dictator type leaders, and we see that. And different traditions have more of that than others. They kind of have the man of God who goes to the mountain and brings us back the word, like Moses or something.
Yep.
I think it's a big. I think in the church, man, we need a real balance of these things because the tail wags the dog in the church so much. I mean, what is happening on the news, what's happening in the culture, it trickles down into the church. I mean, you saw that. I mean, just think about 2020. Think about how much kind of woke kind of stuff has kind of gotten into church. Now, see the backlash from that is now almost like an overcorrection the other way in some ways. And so it's no doubt that we get influenced. I think the way we need to think about it is like, hey, does the church need incredibly strong leadership? My answer is absolutely. You think about Paul, had no problem laying it down. You think about the apostles, they had no problem laying it down in terms of what needed to happen. Jesus had no problem rebuking people. At the same time, do we need to have a plurality so that there isn't one personality that ends up being dominant? And I think that's why you see letters that are written to the elders of the churches in the New Testament. And so I think we need plurality of elders and leaders, but I also think that we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and become weak. We need strong leaders, especially in a moment like this.
That's good. I think for a lot of our listeners, they kind of presume this idea of leadership and authority to be more so on that side of kind of domineering and like I'm going to lead by telling more so than by example. And I think if you look at the scripture, I mean, the Mark 10, the John 13, it's like Jesus kind of led by example of I'm going to wash your feet first, so then you understand what I'm doing later. You have a rich history in this, Pastor, of leadership and trying to mobilize churches and organizations and teams. If you were to really put together a couple of Christian leadership principles for our listeners to kind of apply to their lives today, what would you say are some of the most important things to look for in that kind of person?
Well, it's crazy, but I mean, what we look for really is it comes down to some of the things I even mentioned from a leadership world: hungry, humble, smart. I want people who have an enormous drive for the ministry, and I think that's what we see from some of the great leaders in the New Testament. Man, there is just a hunger. I would become cut off if you could be in. I mean, Paul, you just can't look at Paul's life, beaten, shipwrecked, all that, and not realize this dude is a dog, man.
Yeah.
And that's what we need, And I love that. I want to see drive. I want to see, but there needs to be a deep humility, and you see that Philippians 2. You see that with Jesus. He was, that the whole gospel. The whole gospel story is a gospel of humility, one who didn't count equality, robbery, to be equal with God. And so we want that. And then we look for, in leadership at Mercy Hill, we look for people who are smart, church smart. And smart really is two things. Smart is, man, they know how to navigate people, so they are ones who I would say have internalized much of the book of Proverbs. They have taken the book of Proverbs and they understand that a word in season is what matters. They kind of drip with just this wisdom and how to navigate people. And then secondly, man, they're just able to handle things quickly. Those are people. And I will tell you this too, Ryan. Like one of my philosophies in ministry is that not everybody's supposed to be a leader. I mean, we have made sort of this every member a missionary, which I agree with, into every member is a leader on a leadership pipeline, and that's just not true. There's a lot of people who have no giftings in these things, and that's fine. Like they can be a faithful follower of Christ who disciples their kids and has friends that they invite to church and loves Jesus, and that doesn't mean that they're supposed to lead a multi-tier community group structure.
Sure. Yeah.
And so what I'm talking about in leadership is like what I'm looking for to say, man, who are the ones that are supposed to be sort of the, pastors, leaders in the church, that leaders in business that end up kind of influencing things in the church. And I would submit hungry, humble, smart.
I have a pastoral mentor. He always says when he's looking for people to kind of bring up in the ministry, he wants them to be smelling like sheep. Kind of pushing this idea of service being kind of the driving factor of what kind of defines you as a leader. Pastor, where would you see this in your life? How do you see this play out? And especially in the words of Jesus, where do you
I
see
mean,
this?
the rich, that comes from Baxter, and smell like sheep, and in a Puritan model, and some of the smaller settings like he was in, I think that's really important, and we need that. But at our church, we view that a little more like the laity of the lay elders. Man, we think that pastoral calling is so deep and so rich, but that doesn't mean it's totally a vocation. So at our church, I'm an elder. That means, I'm one of the elders of our church, which means I have oversight caring for the flock. But there are 36 of us, and most of them are lay elders. They don't work at Mercy Hill. They work a normal job, but they're elders in the church. And those guys' primary role is absolutely to smell like sheep. That's what they do, man. They're in groups. They're handling counseling issues. They're helping field. Man, if this is a serious enough counseling issue, that way we can get it up to our campus pastor level, who has a lot of pastoral kind of shepherding roles at the campus pastor level. And so I agree with that totally. But I will tell you this, man, from an organizational standpoint, and when churches begin to grow, you've got to figure out, like, man, who are the kings? If you think prophet, priest, king, like, who are the kings that are going to be able to organize how those shepherds end up smelling like sheep in a large growing organization? Because somebody's got to be able to organize that,
Sure.
and make sure that the care is happening. So sometimes those guys are not. Sometimes the guys that are good at organizing that stuff don't smell like sheep, because that's not their gifting, man. They're not shepherds, and they're leaders. They're drivers. They're growers. But I think a church is really unhealthy if you don't have a balance of, man, we got guys that are growing and organizing, but that doesn't mean that we're leaving people behind. The organization certainly needs to smell like sheep, as you have people that are in positions that are in people's lives. So I don't know if that's exactly where you're going. That's how I think about it. That's how we think about it at Mercy Hill.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense completely. I think a lot of it's kind of just knowing exactly what God what God has given you and gifted you in.
Yeah.
And as we kind of, getting close to finishing here, to transition to not so much of a church position or role, kind of the everyday Christian, Pastor. I think as Christians itself, no matter what vocation you may have, you have a sphere of influence just being a follower of Christ, right?
Yeah.
And so for the listener today who's not possibly going into the ministry or looking to get on church staff, what would you say to them? Like, leadership's not that important for me. I'm not doing that as a job. What would you say to that person?
I would say, hey, look, man, you give me a bunch of young guys, I can teach them how to be pastors. What I can't do is teach somebody how to go out into the marketplace and create business that, number one, is incredibly profitable so that we can fund the whole thing. And number two, create businesses that are in and of themselves a testimony because of the way that they're run. A business like a school, like a team, like, any other organization, a business has an opportunity to be incredibly useful for human flourishing if it's organized in a way that would honor God. And so, I think that, and you think about Every Good Endeavor and Tim Keller, and some of this stuff is become popular. But work in and of itself is something that can glorify God, not just because you sit next to a coworker that is an unbeliever that you need to share with, although you do. Not just because you can make a bunch of money that you need to give away, although you do. But actually, the work itself and the way that it is conducted contributes to a vision and a portrait that we get a chance to display to the world in terms of something that honors God. And so, it's incredible. This divide between sacred and secular, I think, is really. I mean, I've seen a real movement in your generation to try to get away from that and to try to see, like, man, I'm an architect. How does that fit into the economy of God's kingdom?
Yeah.
And not just that I'm giving money to missions, although I'm doing that, but like, how does it all fit together? I just really applaud that. Man, I think that we need to get away from, well, that person's like a really serious Christian, so they need to leave their job, go into the ministry, and then if they're really super Christian, they end up on the mission field. And I think we got to get away from that, and we got to realize what you said, Romans 12. Hey, man, we're not all gifted the same way, and I don't think those spiritual gifts lists are meant to be exhaustive. I think they're examples, and so you end up having. Like me and you, Ryan, we have a gift matrix that's like a snowflake. It involves our passions, our desires, man, the way God has wired us, our physical bodies, and obviously our spiritual gifting. And something about all that creates, in my opinion, a uniqueness that is supposed to connect to the Ephesians 2:10 calling on your life. That there are works that God preordained for you to do. Some of them, like me, are preaching sermons. But some of them, man, are being a really good manager and loving people well and being in the workplace and share and being the aroma of Christ, man, in the real world. I don't live in the real world. I live in the ministry world, And so to me, that kind of idea of like whether you're going to lead in the secular environment or lead in the quote sacred environment, man, let's try to get away from some of that. Let's grow as believers. Let's use our gift matrix wherever we are. Let's be the aroma of Christ.
I love that. Ministry is not so much a vacation as much as it is a calling for all of us. That's a great word, Pastor, for our listeners. I know that they will be encouraged with that. Typically, here on the show, as we wrap up, I ask the guests to share a last pressing word, something personal, something that maybe God is teaching them in and through this season. What would that be for you, Pastor, if you would encourage us, or how could we be praying for you?
I think right now, and this is, just go ahead and date it. This is April, or whenever it's going to come out, April, May. I don't know when it comes out, but we're in springtime 2025. And there is to me, it has now become undeniable that there is a spiritual movement happening in the country. That doesn't mean Jesus, okay, but it is spiritual. And it's just everywhere. I mean, Amazon Bible sales are up like crazy. Companies are wanting to invest in faith-based content. You got the largest platforms in the world, Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, they're on spiritual journeys.
Yeah.
People are obsessed with the psychedelics, ayahuasca, microdosing. They're UFOs. I mean, whatever. There's people are trying to get in touch. I think the modern secular philosophy of life has been so shoved down the American throat, it's starting to be rejected. And I think that means there's an opportunity for us as believers to step in with something that's concrete, not new, very old, hey man, this Jesus gave us this, translated through the apostles, down through the generations in the New Testament. I just think we have a real opportunity right now, Ryan, and if we don't capitalize on it, somebody will. I mean, there's a lot of spirituality in this world is not from God, you know that, and so how do we try to really capitalize on this moment where there is, I think, this sort of shift? I mean, you're seeing it on the college campuses. I had a chance to interview Sean McDowell, Ruslan KD, and Wesley Huff in the last 3 weeks. I interviewed all three of them, and they all three said the same thing. There is no doubt that the college generation is waking up, and we're seeing it all over. I mean, there's just a revival. It's happening in Greensboro.
Yep.
We got to make sure that it's a great time to be in the public square, advocating for the faith. I just don't want us. I want us to not miss a moment right here.
No matter where you are, what you're doing, are you willing and courageous enough to not miss a moment for the gospel? Pastor, that's a great word. Thank you so much for joining us today. Where can our listeners go to learn more about you and all that you're doing?
Man, the easiest place is to go to andrewphopper.com. That's going to have just all of my stuff. But you can also check out mercyhillchurch.com. If you're a church leader, if you can let me just do this plug.
Yeah.
I would go to breakinggrowthbarriers.com. And we have a podcast and a private Facebook group that is all about this idea. I'll give it to you in a sentence. Churches can grow without going, but they can't go without growing. And so it's all about church growth that ends up with its chief end being in sending other church plants out, missionaries out. So they can check out any of that.
Yes, I love it. Wherever you're listening to podcasts, I would encourage you to check these things out. But Pastor, thank you so much for joining us. I'm grateful for a friend and a mentor in you, and just thank you so much for encouraging all of us today.
Ryan, thank you, brother.